Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the new series of the Faster Project EV webinar panel sessions. And we've got a fantastic lineup for you today, who I'll introduce in the next few minutes. But first and foremost, as is tradition, we'll get Donal to give us an update on the latest progress with the Faster Project.
Thank you, Euan, and morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to have so many of you with us this morning for our brand new series of the EV Talk webinars. And we're obviously delighted to be working again with Euan on this new series. So we'll have six more of the webinars between now and November as we reach the final delivery stages of the Faster project. I suppose a very quick update on where we are with project infrastructure at the moment. We recently announced that Hitrans, our project partner in Scotland, has contracted with Scottish Power to install and commission the 24 50 kilowatt charging stations across the Western Isles and the Highlands. So work on that aspect of the project will begin in May. And of course, progress updates will be made available across the Faster project social media channels and website. In the Republic of Ireland, our partners at Louth County Council have just closed a pre-qualification questionnaire for potential suppliers there interested in running the infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. And they expect to move to the final stage of procurement in May with the appointment of a contractor then in June, and expected works to begin then later in the summer. In Northern Ireland here, Ulster University, I believe, are expected to publish the tender documents on e-sourcing NI either today or within the next few days. So again, that's very exciting, and we will have confirmation of that on our social media channels as and when that's available. So great progress on the infrastructure aspect of the project at last. In terms of our other work that we're doing, so as many of you have been following along our monthly review series, we'll have a new series of films coming later this summer, and those will be filmed here in Northern Ireland this time. So we'll have more information hopefully on that next month. We'll also be working with Euan and the team at Cenex on a series of EV Talk roadshows. And we hope to bring a live roadshow event to each of the project regions. We'll have one in Scotland, one here in Northern Ireland, and one in the Republic of Ireland. So we're very excited about those. And again, we'll be keeping you up to date in terms of what we're planning for those over the next few weeks and months on our social channels. We've also, over the past week, announced a new content sharing partnership with Power NI and Energia. And so we're delighted that both those organizations are working with us to help promote and, I suppose, amplify our key messages and support the work that we've been doing through the Faster project. So I suppose there's been lots happening, lots of work still to do, but we're delighted to be back with the new series of webinars. And as I always say, you know, if we can be of assistance or support at any time, or if you have any questions in relation to the project itself, or in terms of electric vehicle use and the transition to EV use across the regions, do get in touch. Always happy to support there. And also just to say that looking forward very much to going along to Fully Charged in Farnborough next weekend. So if anybody is going along to that event, hopefully I'll get to see some of you in person. So yeah, if you are there, do say hello if you spot me walking around anywhere. So very much looking forward to that next weekend. So I will pass back over to Euan.
Thank you, Donal. Yeah, definitely see you at Fully Charged Live next weekend as well. Looking forward to it. So a couple of things. First of all, we had a fantastic webinar just towards the end of last year talking about accessibility, and a very good point was raised about having the closed captioning enabled on the webinar, which I then promptly forgot to do this morning. So thank you so much to the participant who has enabled that. You should hopefully be able to see the transcript upon request now. So apologies about that. That was my fault. And also, There was an apology for absence today. So exciting times, I suppose, for Melanie Shufflebottom from ZapMap. They're launching their new website today. That's had to go ahead today, this morning. So I've already had a quick look at the website. It certainly seems to be much improved and much faster and easier to navigate than it had been previously. It runs a lot faster on my PC. So congratulations to Melanie and the ZapMap team. Go and check out their website. But sadly, that means because she's on hand to support that rollout today, she won't be able to join us. But we do have a stellar lineup to discuss the very topical and thorny issue of electricity prices, not just in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, but also, you know, we've had a knock-on effect across much of the world recently. And how has that affected the economics of running electric vehicles, but also what's caused those prices to rise in the first place? So to discuss this today, we have an incredible lineup. We have Gill Nowell from LV Electrix. We have Sara Sloman from Paythrough and the EV Cafe. We have Sara Merrick from Ripple Energy. We have Lorna McAtear from National Grid. And joining us just now, we have Kate Tyrrell from ChargeSafe as well. If you'd all like to come on screen and put your mics on as well, great to have you all with us today. We truly do have a star-studded lineup for this session. So jumping straight into it, one that's going to be more focused probably towards those who are more heavily involved in the energy sector. But what has caused those electricity prices to rise? And I suppose that the best way to begin is to describe how the wholesale electricity market works. So I think basically it's going to be a bun fight between Lorna and Sara Merrick. Who wants to take this one? But yeah,
I'll take the first one because it's the easy one I can answer.
Good stuff. On you go.
No, I mean, to put that into context, because obviously I'm the fleet manager, but working at National Grid, I do understand bits and pieces of how some of it works. And for me, I always put it in the English so that I can understand it. So very simply, the market price for electricity is set by the highest price in the market, and then everyone gets that price. So in today's case, it's the gas generators, and gas is expensive. So that is why the electricity they generate is then expensive, because it sets the price, and everything is set then at that price as it goes through. In a nutshell, basically.
So basically, if you have like wind power bidding very cheaply into the market, and then solar and nuclear, etc., it's that one at the top that sets the price that everyone else is paid.
Yes.
Yeah, wow, that's quite eye-opening, and that just shows even if there's a tiny amount of gas on the grid, just to make up that last bit of demand, it's the one that's setting the price for everything.
That's not the whole of the market. So lots of you have power purchase agreements where, you know, let's say like Ripple, our wind farm signed a long-term agreement and it fixed the price on a yearly basis. So it doesn't matter what's happening in the kind of short-term market. You still get paid the same amount of electricity across the whole year. So there is that's how the kind of wholesale market works. But lots of electricity is traded bilaterally. So, you know, wind farms or solar parks or gas stations, you know, they would sign power purchase agreements for their volumes with suppliers, and that the price of those is not that's fixed, and it isn't as volatile as the rest of the market. But yeah, it's the marginal pricing that really has hit everyone. Actually,
you raise a good point about power purchase agreements, because there's something else that I've heard about, which is contracts for difference, which seems to have been applied to quite a lot of offshore wind recently, and also nuclear as well, if I remember correctly. So can anyone explain what contracts for difference are and whether they are a good thing in the current market or not in terms of bringing down prices?
Yes, so I can take that one. So a contract for difference is the new, it sort of started off as a subsidy mechanism, but now they're kind of below market price. So basically, if you're initially it was offshore wind and nuclear, you could bid into an auction and you say, I want a price of £100 or £50 or £60, whatever it was, and you would then say, I will generate electricity for their 15-year contracts, and basically what happens is you then get paid the difference between the price you agree and the market price. So if you agree a price of say £70 and the market price is £100, you would be paying back the difference because you've agreed you can do it for 70. So if the price is higher, you kind of pay back the surplus to the government. If the price is lower, then you get topped up to that level. So it means that you can have for things like offshore wind farm, offshore wind farms, solar farms now, onshore wind farms and nuclear, it gives them a stable level of revenue for the long term. But it also means in the recent price spikes that we've seen, the level of these contracts for difference ended up being way below what the market price was. So the offshore wind farms were actually paying back to the government rather than I think what the expectation was is that they would be paid out. But because the price went up so high, it went up beyond the kind of strike price, these offshore wind farms ended up paying money back, which actually then helped reduce electricity bills for consumers around the country. So yeah, they are a very good mechanism. You don't have to go into a CFD, so you can decide, do you want to bid into the auction or not? You're not forced to do that. You can, sign power purchase agreements completely separately outside the CFD mechanism. So it's a competitive mechanism, and it's brought, the cost of offshore wind, I think in the first one was like £155. It's now come down to less than 50, which is just crazy in a really short amount of time. So it's created like lots of competitive pressure in the market, which has brought costs down really, really well. So they have been a really great success, and you're now seeing them kind of being rolled out across other markets as well. So yeah, they are seen internationally as a good, very successful mechanism.
That's seriously eye-opening stuff. Sara Sloman has pointed out there's some great questions coming in already, actually. What we'll do is we'll have our Q&A at the end, of course. But if you do have questions, just to remind everyone, if you put them in the Q&A section rather than the chat, that means we don't lose them amongst the buzz of the actual chat, which is always so active and engaged, and that's fantastic, by the way. But definitely, if you put it in the Q&A, there's a greater chance of us being able to pick up on that. But yeah, so in terms of contracts for difference, I mean, there's been a lot of tabloid hysteria about renewables causing these price rises, but it sounds like it's the polar opposite. If anything, they're bringing costs down, because it's like your gas is setting that price and everybody's being paid that, except you, offshore wind, pony up the change. And that's being paid back in and making everyone's bills cheaper. So yeah, I mean, it's frustrating that coming from an academic background, that kind of tabloid hysteria isn't subject to the same rigorous peer review to make sure it's accurate before it's just chucked out there. But
doesn't sell newspapers.
Exactly. And this is the frustrating thing, because the truth is the total opposite of that hysteria. It's absolutely fossil fuels, from what you've just said, that have set these prices so high, and renewables on contracts for difference that are bringing it down again. So in terms of, what's caused those gas prices to rise? So we know that wholesale prices of electricity have risen because of the cost of gas. What's made gas so expensive? Who wants to take that one? I suppose it's largely geopolitical because of the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I was going to say, it depends which newspaper you read. We'll have us believe it's the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Others would just say it's a diversion tactic away from build projects. So no, I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I think you had sort of like the Asian post-COVID recovery that led to a lot of gas being diverted to Asia because their economies were picking up. You then had 6 months later, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that meant that gas supplies were at risk. But the political instability made gas prices shoot up a lot. So yeah, you've got a bit of sort of macroeconomic impacts from the post-COVID recovery in Asia, but then that was just exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which obviously people
don't forget we have our seasonal peaks as well, so you always have your seasonal peak with winter.
Exactly. So there was kind of like a perfect storm of so many different factors, all leading to a very, very just unprecedented spike in gas prices.
Very true.
And that's the key thing we need to remember, Euan. It's a spike and it's unprecedented, and it's not necessarily likely to happen again. Yeah,
it's very much a kind of flash in the pan.
Is it possible as well, with the whole COVID situation and the way that we started to use energy changed, in that the people who could and were able to afford to, went and had their houses done up, and they installed solar, and they might have installed heat pumps and all these incredible things that are self-generating and using that energy that's produced in the home. But then also a lot of people started to work from home, meaning that larger scale businesses, industrial parks, things were, you know, not using as much energy as they previously had. Would that have potentially have impacted the individual domestic cost of energy, because we're taking it away from those large scale businesses who would have had those contracts in place, and we're putting it back into the home? And in some places, homes are actually generating their own power, making the cost of energy more expensive because there's less people to sell it to. Does that make any sense? I'm just wondering if that has had an impact.
I think you had, during COVID, there was a big reduction in electricity demand across the whole economy, and that led to really, really low power prices. So, so there was that sort of demand impact during COVID, and then it was the kind of post-COVID recovery when things sort of started ramping up. It wasn't possible to kind of ramp things up quickly enough, and that's partly what led to the price spikes. But I think, you know, overall, in terms of electricity demand, we are expecting it to increase significantly as people switch to EVs, as people switch to heat pumps as well. So yeah, the Committee on Climate Change is expecting significant increase in electricity consumption in the UK by 2035. And you know, overall, but I think as well as energy efficiency has made real strides, and so it quite often gets forgotten that actually, if you take out EVs and heat pumps, people were using a lot less electricity because of, you know, energy efficiency, and now that's kind of it's kind of been hidden by the growth in electricity demand because of EVs and heat pumps. But energy efficiency just works really, really well, and was, you know, already being reducing the nation's electricity consumption.
Yeah, and I think
LED light bulb has had the biggest impact going.
Yeah, exactly. I remember selling LED light bulbs during my student days in B&Q, the very first ones that came in, and people being like, but they're more expensive. Sorry, I sold them in Dundee, hence the accent. But the point is that, you know, by the end of my tenure at that little B&Q, they were selling themselves. I didn't have to put in the hard work. And I suppose because that's been adopted for street lighting, that's part of the reason we're seeing lamppost charge points, because there's that spare capacity on what was previously a very power hungry sodium discharge lamp is now LED. So you've now got 3 to 5 kilowatts worth of spare room to play with for EV charging. Yeah, it's incredible how that humble little device has had such a profound impact.
Yeah, and I think as well, probably it's worth saying as well that in terms of electric vehicles and the grid, the electricity grid, that of course EVs can really support the grid itself. You know, if we're thinking about vehicle to grid, vehicle to home technologies, my own personal, not quite a bugbear, but I just really want vehicle to grid to roll out, you know, across CCS. You know, so we know it works clearly on CHAdeMO, Nissan Leaf and so on, but wouldn't it be great, you know? And I know there's a lot of amazing innovative work going on that front, but you know, I really can't wait to be able to use vehicle to grid. Not that I will be able to with my Kia e-Niro at the moment, but maybe my next EV I will be able to.
Oh yeah, that's part of my annoyance with the fact that CCS won the format war. It's VHS, whereas CHAdeMO is Betamax, because it is better quality. It could do V2G from day one, and it can do up to 400 kilowatts in its latest iteration. Why didn't we stick with that? Why were we too proud, and why did we go for a half-baked solution that didn't have V2G from day one? But I'll get off my high horse now. And you know, we've somewhat gone off-piste within the sort of notes I had here, but we've absolutely covered some phenomenal stuff. So I was quite happy to let that kind of snowball that conversation. But if electricity is more expensive now, does that mean that it's electricity companies, the companies like that are actually selling you your electricity to your house, whether it's Octopus, whether it's OVO or whoever, are they the ones that are making an absolute killing just now? Or are they also struggling because of the cost of electricity?
Well, I can tell you grid isn't the one making the money, because we don't make, buy or sell. So actually the contribution that goes towards the grid is the same as it's always been. It's still about £20 in your entire bill that goes through to what we do in terms of infrastructure. So one of the things we need people to understand, as you said there, Euan, you've got the grid, you've got the generators, you've got those that sell it. So there are lots of different players in this. It's not just the energy companies are making money. That's not true.
It's the classic case of the shop front versus the consumer. Like, I'm with Scottish Power now, and I would say their consumer experience is very good. They send you push notifications via the app to let you know what you're using, give you the opportunity to put real-time meter readings in. I feel quite empowered by that. I can join the list for a smart meter. Ancient cottage, don't get me started. But it is good to know that they're being very open and honest with their profit that they're making as their small part of the chain, to further Lorna's point. But they are what I call the shop front, because everyone just blames whoever they've got over the door and quickly tries to switch, and they put a hold on people switching for that panic reason. The consumers panic. They decided to stop people from being able to switch for a while, which actually coincided with the peak in demand for electric vehicles. That was a bit of a tough sell to people trying to say you can do cheap tariffs with your electric car. They wait 2 months to get it, and then they can't switch energy tariffs to one that suits drivers. So yeah, I do think they probably are making profit, but they kind of need to. And of course, we just had the government reimbursement scheme. I think I get £69 or something, £62 back into my account every month, which was quite unexpected, but very welcome.
Of course,
yeah,
you'll be paying
think,
that back eventually.
I think that you've got the, as you said, the shop front, you know, the suppliers, the people who have benefited the most from the price spikes have been the gas producers, who have been benefiting from the high price. It hasn't cost them more to, you know, drill for gas, but so that's where the real massive profits have been. Obviously, suppliers have had to put their prices up because they've had to be buying gas at a much higher price. So yeah, I think suppliers have had a really tough time over the last couple of years. They've been trying to keep their customers, you know, help them as best they can with the cost of living crisis that, you know, is driven in large part by energy bills.
No, that's a really good point. It is because, you know, gas is still cheap to extract, but it's obviously being sold for an absolute fortune, which is why we've seen BP, Shell and Centrica having those obscene, quite frankly, immoral profits when people are shivering to death because they can't afford electricity because it's been driven by the price of gas. And it's difficult not to get political at that sort of point. But something we'll cover later on would be ways to try and bring down electricity prices permanently. But I suppose that we could discuss just now the mechanism of the windfall tax and how far the existing UK one goes and whether that's far enough. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think so as a result of, or in response to the high electricity prices that generators, including wind farms, were receiving, the government introduced a windfall tax so that they would tax the kind of notional profits from a generating station, whatever that was, or actually, except if it was a gas station, because they recognised that the gas stations had to pay more money for their gas. So the government introduced a windfall tax, which started on the 1st of January this year. It applied to all wind farms that generated more than 50 gigawatt hours per year, I think it was. And then there was a £10 million allowance each year. So it wouldn't, depending on what the electricity price is. So like our wind farm, Kirkhill, we don't think that would be need to pay it because of the kind of allowance. But yeah, it was kind of shutting the stable door after the horses bolted, really, because all of those, you know, high prices that people had realized, you know, had already been made, and so it was kind of a bit too late to really address the real problems that had already faced consumers. So yeah, it is what it is, but it's not going to, you know, it's not going to recover the money that has already been spent by consumers on high electricity prices.
So the windfall tax was basically put more on the electricity producers, like, as you said, wind or solar or whoever, rather than the people who are extracting gas from the North Sea.
Well, no, so there were two. There was an electricity windfall tax, and then there was the oil and gas windfall. Exactly. Right. So there were two. Yes, no, the windfall tax on oil and gas producers, that has been that was introduced earlier than the electricity windfall tax. Sorry, I thought you meant the electricity windfall tax. Yeah. So
the electricity one was January the 1st.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. No. So there was one on oil and gas producers that was introduced earlier, and then that was kind of a ramping up of there's already a form of windfall tax, albeit there are lots of ways. If you invest in new extraction, I think you can avoid, you can get exemptions from the tax, which
that's too many loopholes, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kate's just mentioned in the comments that this is getting her ready for a riot as well, and quite rightly. Like, if that was correct about there being no windfall tax on gas producers, it turns out there is, but it might as well not be there because of the loopholes anyway. But if there had been zero effort, I was about to go full on apoplectic with rage, because this is like, that's literally the only people making any serious money right now at everyone else's expense. But so now we know what has driven those electricity price rises. I suppose we should turn our attention to the impact on EV drivers. So if we start first and foremost with the cost of charging at public chargers, why have public chargers become so expensive in particular? Because yes, there's been an increase in domestic electricity prices, but we've obviously seen the news about, in 2022, the first charging networks to go above £1 per kilowatt hour, and people saying, oh, I'm as well going back to petrol, that sort of thing. So why are those public charging networks so comparatively expensive? Sara Sloman, of course, you are heavily involved in the EV charging sector, so I'll let you lead with this one.
And also, I do love a webinar where I learn stuff. I've literally written a whole page of notes already, sending myself back to school on this energy transition piece. The charges are obviously complex. You've got everything from the grid connection costs that the companies who are providing them will incur. You may have some kind of landlord regulation that they need to pay as an overhead as well. Then they need to factor in the maintenance of the charger. But no one really cares when they turn up to a charger, like I did last night, and it said 98 pence per kilowatt hour, plus don't stay there too long because you'll get £10 fine, and then another £10 for every minute that you're there for. And so I went into the hotel bar and I could hear somebody else complaining about the same thing, but we both concluded we need it. That's the only charger for like 10 miles that actually works. And in that sentiment, I was delighted to pay that money because I had to get here. So, there's nothing I could do about it at that stage, but we do need to be careful that they don't all nudge up slightly. I'm very impressed when you can, I drive a Tesla at the moment. I've had many other cars. Shout out to the Kia e-Niro fans, the 4 Plus all the way, Gill, because that one and the Tesla are different, because when I'm inside my Tesla, it tells me the peak, what I will pay at that charger depending on the time of day. And I find that quite impactful. And I think the user experience interface can help people make choices with their public charging, but the reasons that the public charging costs have to be that price is a whole feast of behind the scenes stuff that I think needs communicating better to the driver to help them to understand. I call it premium service, right? If you charge overnight on a low powered charger, you can expect to pay less. But my community charger is now 80 pence per kilowatt hour at 7.4 deliverable speed. So if I could use a 50 kilowatt one for 98p, I tend to go for the 50 and above, because even though it's more expensive, at least I don't have to sort of move the car at the end of the night or anything like that from the community spot. So it used to be very clear, it was like half the price. The super quick ones were twice the price of the super slow ones, and people were happy to take the time on the slow ones to benefit. But now that gap is closing. And I think consumer behavior is very much around popping up and going again, or paying for a longer destination charge. I can see the pricing being flipped to be advantageous. Like if you are staying in this hotel, all you can eat charging for another £10–15 might be something that hoteliers start to do to encourage people to fill up whilst they're parked.
Very good point. I mean, in comparison to a hotel I was at recently where it was 85 pence per kilowatt hour with a £2 connection fee for an AC destination charge point. Nah, not going to happen. That all you can eat model would definitely be advantageous, especially because, as we'll no doubt discuss in a bit, electricity is cheaper overnight. And, if you're on a dynamic tariff, one that tracks the wholesale electricity price, you can take advantage of that. But we'll definitely come back to that in more detail, particularly for home and fleet charging, because that's something that is, that you as a fleet manager or an EV driver can directly take action on. But yeah, with regards
to some quick maths, Euan, can I just interject?
Yeah, go for it.
So basically in December we moved, and we don't have an EV charger at home, so I'm solely reliant on public charging. And I have just run some figures, so I have some actual real life numbers here. In December I also took delivery of a Model 3, which has meant that I use the supercharger network a little bit more than I ever have. I never got to use it before, basically. So I use it because it's easy, it's simple, and it's quite reliable. And there is one right near by the office, which is great. So since I got the Tesla in December, I have driven 6,052 miles. I have paid, according to my bank, the Tesla Supercharge network a total of £585.42 since taking the Tesla. And I work that out to be 0.097 pence per mile. Don't know if that's right.
If your maths is right, that's actually good, because I've been tracking I've not got home charge, I haven't had for 3 years, but I've been tracking mine similarly, and mine works out between 20 and 25p a mile. Constantly,
I could be wrong though.
consistently.
Is anybody else
quite good?
really good at maths? The Tesla Supercharger network tends to be a bit cheaper as well, I found. So
yeah, it fluctuates. Sometimes it's 48p, sometimes 52, but that's what I was describing earlier. It tells you on the in-dash display why are other OEMs not providing this level of data. It's because the open data protocols aren't quite mandated yet, as well as just driver desire. So there's a lot to come on both sides, not just the charge. It's a bit like we're saying about, is it the shop front of the electricity company making a fortune? You pull up to a charge and you go, oh, I'm not using that company ever again because they're charging me 98p. That's absolutely not the case. It was the opposite for me. So I was like, that is steep, but I'm really grateful. And I do luckily understand. And I was thinking this about this panel, actually. I love the Faster project because you do try to translate what we're talking about as an in-industry message. But it's our job as everybody on this call and the 98 people watching that actually we need to translate this message and get it out to our networks, because we get it. But when you pull up to that charger and you're a new driver and you do the maths like Kate did, it's horrifying. You might have regret, real life consumer regret. You're nodding, Jill, do you agree?
Yeah, I do, Sarah. And I think it comes down to the communication piece, doesn't it, for kind of new electric car drivers and for people who are thinking about making the switch. And it's around being transparent. The charge point operators really do need to be really transparent around cost, pence per kilowatt hour, but also it comes down to, you know, how do we help prospective and new EV drivers understand the charging curve, for example. And then in the same thread, I think, you know, I have a Kia e-Niro. Its maximum rapid charge rate, for example, is 77 kilowatt. It actually took me quite a while to realize that, you know, if I go and plug into a 350 kilowatt ultra fast, rapid, super quick charger, it's only ever going to charge up to 77 kilowatt. And that depends on the state of charge to begin with. So, you know, there's so many, I think, complexities around driving an electric car, which actually, once you do start to drive an electric car, it becomes clear. However, I think there are some fundamentals that that we as a group, as an industry, need to help consistently communicate. But also, you know, there's a big job for the charge point operators to do as well, to be transparent in their pricing, you know, to be transparent about, you know, even just simple things. And I think, for example, actually, I will call out Shell here, and I know there are some others that do it very well up to 150 kilowatt, you know, on their charges, for example. And it's just that up to that helps make that, you know, hopefully clearer for the EV driver.
Couple of points, actually. Lorna, I'll let you go first.
No, I just wanted to go back to the touch point that Jill said there on fundamentals, and it touches on something Sarah mentioned about earlier as well. What we've got with driver behaviours and going back to fundamentals, where you choose to charge is no different to anyone in an ICE vehicle and where they choose to fill up based on pricing. So motorway service areas were always notoriously more expensive for their pump prices. So you wouldn't do it, or you might only in an emergency to do your quick top up. You wouldn't fill up your entire tank. You would top it up to make sure you got to your next destination. That behavior in that very fundamental sense is no different to charging and using public network, unless that is the only thing you can do. So what we have to remember is keeping it very simple. It's the same with car parking spaces. You'll always go for the free one if you can, but actually if it's more convenient for you and you haven't got to walk, or it's right next to the shop because you're carrying all your stuff, you'll pay for the more expensive one. It's natural human behavior, and people will take advantage of it, or it's because it costs more to put those things in place in the first place. So we just have to remember some of those fundamentals. This isn't new. We are used to this, no matter what vehicle type we drive.
True. And actually, another point about the expense of public charging versus being able to charge at home. I don't know, Sarah, if you mentioned this already, but VAT. So it's currently 20% for public charging versus 5% for electricity at home, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fun, isn't it? Makes it advantageous for people that have got driveways and chargers at home, therefore houses that can accommodate that, therefore potentially medium to high earners. It seems vastly unfair, especially now we're entering into a phase where you've got the take-home fleet drivers who are being sort of imposed upon to have this EV van, whatever, which can make life hard. And I've really admired Quentin Wilson for doing the campaign about fair charge. We got right behind it, a pay through. Our MD has also signed that. Obviously, a financial institution, we understand it better. I don't, I'm there to represent EV, but I'm learning from them that it is grossly unfair. It isn't right that that should be the case. And the excuses of when you see the sort of responses from people signing these letters to the government to stop that or to level that, it's just slopey shoulder central. People are like, well, we do other incentives, we've kickstarted the boost. And yeah, we get that, but we're still facing a huge gap between 5 and 20. That seems very unfair.
Exactly.
Yeah, we do. I really also applaud Fair Charge and Quentin Wilson for what they're trying to do on the VAT issue, because ultimately we need to ensure that electric cars are affordable for everyone across our communities. You know, and that includes, of course, seeing a more buoyant second-hand market, because, of course, I think it was in 2021, something like 6.5 million used cars were bought in the UK, and just over 1 million new cars were bought in the UK. So, you know, most of us are buying second-hand. There's no doubt about it. So we need a more buoyant second-hand market. But, you know, I know Shane from ChargeSafe is quite active in the chat, which is really great to see. And I love the innovation that's coming through, you know, in terms of, for example, on-street charging. You know, ChargeSafe have recently launched, I think, their nighttime saver tariff. So that is, you know, it's those kind of on-street charge point operators, and I'm sure others, who are starting to try and address that, you know, inequality, I suppose, in terms of what people are having to pay if you have a driveway, if you don't have a driveway.
I think one of the things we need to remember as well, we're all on this because we've got vested interests. We've been doing this a while. We're still really early on. We are still learning. The government is still learning. The installers are still learning. People are still learning. And we've yet to move into the entire mass adoption curve. We're starting and we're getting there. And a lot of the things that we would have put up with or tested out or tried or learned, actually we're going to have to do very differently and think differently to take it forward for that mass adoption piece. So it's not just about the price. And the thing with the CPOs and the public charging network, a lot of them will have to run at a loss to start with, because they've got to recover all those upfront costs. So this is why it's there. So I noticed in the chat, someone was talking about free chargers disappearing in Northern Ireland now. Well, it happened in Scotland as well, didn't it, Euan? Everything was free for a while, and then gradually it's become charging. As you move forward, they have to put something in to cover their maintenance cost and the staffing costs.
Absolutely. And if we look at East Lothian Council, Ryan Robertson, who I think is actually a panelist on our next webinar, so stay tuned for that, as is Shane Rees from ChargeSafe, who's been very active in the chat. But yeah, so East Lothian was one of the first Scottish local authorities to introduce charging tariffs on its ChargePlace Scotland chargers. And Ryan is always on the ball with the data. So he saw that there was a drop-off in usage, which was basically clearing the lecky spongers who were doing that because they could charge for free on a public charge point, but they could actually charge at home if they wanted to. It's just they'd have to pay for it there. But now that it was no longer advantageous, they were charging at home. However, after that drop, the usage started to increase again, because more and more people were adopting electric vehicles and more people needed to use that charging infrastructure. So for the sake of that on-street charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland, that now means that there'll be more people who will be able to adopt electric vehicles, because they'll actually be able to charge, even if they don't have a driveway, without lecky spongers taking advantage of what has been a very nice incentive, but absolutely had to come to an end at some point. I mean, you look at Norway, for example, EV leader with over 80% of new cars sold being electric. Even in 2018, when I was there, huge amounts of L-bill, as they're known, all across the cities. You know, I tried counting them in one set of burst of traffic lights and lost count because there was just that many. Point is that you know, they'd had charging tariffs for some time on their public charging infrastructure, and it was reasonably pricey, but it got you to where you needed to go. and people were buying this electric technology because it made sense. And yes, there were other incentives, but it absolutely made sense for their lifestyle. And the free charging was not an incentive that was necessary whatsoever. So yeah, fully agree with you there, Lorna. We need those tariffs. It's weird that veteran EV drivers
really
actually asked to pay more.
The whole free charging thing, I myself have made the same mistake. We rolled out loads of chargers as a local authority, and we felt very strongly, because the pressure from the sort of residents of the area felt that they should benefit from low cost charging as an incentive. But I think that's the mistake. I've never sold electric cars. I've never been on the car side of the EV market. It's always been the chargers and now the software. But I was just wincing, because I'm like, please, please, please stop celebrating that. Yeah, you save tons of money going electric. Yes, you can, if you can do solar, battery, on charge, overnight charging, but not like the future of the market, which will have a huge swathe of people that can't do that. And therefore, for me, the costs weighed out the same as what was then a family diesel back in 2018. So I was like, well, let's do it, because for me, it's about clean air and sort of trying new technology, whereas that argument now is quite hard to say to someone. It's going to cost you the same as the car you've already got, that you really like, that you understand, and that makes sense for your family and work. But by the way, you're going to have to get this electric one. So I think I love the consumer behavior piece. It really excites me. And I really like this whole incentivization piece. Remember Pod Point, salute to them, chucked a whole load of chargers into Cabot Circus Shopping Centre in Bristol. Now, you didn't pay for the charging, but because you were there forever, they obviously cut a deal with the car park company, because they charge a fortune. It's like 20 quid to park for 6 hours. And I thought that was genius, because I was so happy to stay for 6 hours. What do you think my uplift was in the amount I spent the time I was there for? Let's go for dinner, let's go to the cinema, because I'm here, I'm happy, my car's charging, I'm going to go back to the full charge. So if someone came along and went, oh, that's 58p per kilowatt hour, I'd be watching the clock and backing off that charger back to a different, cheaper option. But it probably was, but I didn't feel it or see it, because I'm a consumer, and I liked the idea that I paid what I got, and I was going to stay there until the last minute.
Going back to your point though, Sarah, when I did my business case for the entire fleet, all of the cars, shifting and everything over, I didn't factor in to the price of electricity. It wasn't part of the business case. So when I did, I didn't use it. And so when I went, and I basically did everything on the NIC contributions, all the other tax incentives, everything was in there. And also for us, the biggest thing was, you cannot put a price on the cost of air quality and what we breathe and the damage we're doing to the environment. So we need to remember that in all of this context. But when I did that business case and took it through, the finance director said, well, what about the price of electricity? I went, it's not factored in. You went, but it's cheaper. I went, yeah, well, it's a no-brainer then. If you've already got savings here, before you've really even done the rest, then it makes no difference whatsoever. And it's the right thing to do, and it ticked all the boxes at that point in time. It's got tougher in the supply chain environment at the moment, but we know this is a blip and it will sort itself out. So it's still worthwhile doing.
Oh, the other thing about free charging that's bad is people don't factor in maintenance scheduling into that. It was the first question you asked me, was why are chargers so expensive to use? And that's because there's so much behind the scenes that nobody will ever understand. And, you know, people go, I'm never using that network ever again because the machines are always broken. Yeah, probably because they didn't negotiate a maintenance contract or proactive servicing for that machine. So, you know, it makes everyone look bad. It upsets the driver. It makes the shop front look terrible, the charger company look terrible. But actually, it's usually down to that sort of nitty-gritty legal negotiation, the service level agreement that happens way before the concrete sets.
It's not just the points that Lorna and Sarah are both making are brilliant, because it's not just about the low cost to power the vehicle, because that will change moving forward as we see an increase in demand. But actually, the other huge argument at the moment is, I can't believe they're expanding the ULEZ zone. Now, that's London's ULEZ zone, but other ULEZ zones will occur in large cities across the UK. And the only way to avoid those ULEZ costs is going to be to get into an electric vehicle. So surely we should be using the narrative now not to be like, oh, you can save money on the cost to charge. It's actually, you're not going to face a daily ULEZ fee, or use public transport, or actually check out the air you're breathing. The air quality has improved in a big city. In Portsmouth, the air quality here is ridiculously bad. Like, they're constantly campaigning for a clean air zone. Yeah, everybody will be sat in traffic every morning and every evening with their engines idling. next to massive banners that say, you know, cough, cough, engines off, and it's just an absolute joke. So I would really like to see stricter enforcement of ULEZ fines, expansion of those areas, and the industry as a whole really hammering that point home as a benefit, rather than, oh, it will cost you less to run your car. Well, actually, no, it will cost you less to drive an EV, because now driving a diesel is going to cost you this amount, because it's way more expensive. More expensive, is that the word? It's still early.
And of course, that's not even touched upon maintenance, where EVs are incredibly mechanically simple and will just run and run, basically. But on that note, we'll probably come back to that towards the end when we have a look at cost savings for electric fleets. So Lorna, having quite rightly said about the other benefits of electric vehicles, we will come back to the cold hard maths in just a little bit. But sort of wrapping up the public charging aspect before we look at home charging, I think it's fair to say that you know, the public charging companies are not ripping us off. They are paying what they're having to. That price will come down again. Seems to be the gist of it, especially as we're seeing wholesale electricity prices decreasing now. So that will eventually translate to you know, to cheaper tariffs that these companies will be paying for electricity to feed to your car. So cost of charging at home. Now, Gill, I know that this is something that is an area of your expertise with LV Electrix. So is it more expensive at the moment to charge an electric vehicle at home on your driveway versus running a petrol car?
I think the first thing to say on that point, Euan, is, you know, anybody making the switch to an electric car, you know, I'd really strongly suggest that they look at what energy tariff they're on, of course. You know, if you can get yourself onto an EV friendly off-peak energy tariff, then it is so much cheaper to charge at home. I did some sums yesterday in preparation for today, and you know, so my off-peak energy tariff, so off-peak between the hours of midnight and 4:30 in the morning, 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So I reckon that's about 2 pence per mile. On peak, it's just over 42 pence, which I think is about 9.5 pence per mile. But the brilliant thing is that with the advent of you know, smart chargers now being mandated, this means that it's really straightforward for me to schedule my charging so that I only ever charge my car off peak. So unless I've been on a particularly long journey, which is quite rare, I will just tend to top up to 80%. So I very rarely sort of get home, plug in and start to charge from a very low state of charge, which means that I do the vast majority of my charging off peak, you know, overnight when I'm asleep. And it is so simple, literally takes me about 10 seconds to charge my car, I always say. And so looking at some of the sums then, you know, as I do the vast majority of charging off peak, overnight, then I think I worked out that for me to have driven 12,000 miles in my Kia Niro, it's cost me for those 12,000 miles about £420. So, you know, that's mostly off-peak charging with a bit of on-peak and some public charging thrown in for good measure. So I think that, what would it cost to fill up with petrol or diesel? So what, about £100 for a full tank? You know, it's less than £5 to fully charge my car, which is about 280 miles. So it is incredibly cheaper. And of course, you know, you will know this very, very well, Euan. We did a piece of work that you were very involved in with LV called the Electric Car Cost Index. So this is where we, and I use the term we loosely because Euan, you did all the data crunching on this for us. We looked at 13 electric cars and compared them with their sort of petrol diesel equivalents. And we looked at all the costs involved. So this was a total cost of ownership piece. And when we talk about total cost of ownership, we are including, cost to charge or cost to fuel, and then, the purchase, lease or PCP costs, and then as well as the fuel or charging, all the maintenance, the insurance and the tax, all in that together. And although this piece of work was done a little while ago now, essentially it found that if you can mostly charge at home, then electric running costs for an electric car are 47% lower. than for their sort of equivalent petrol or diesel car. You know, when we found that, you know, a significant number of those electric cars were cheaper over a 4-year lease term, and actually all of them came out cheaper over 7 years of outright ownership. So that was really interesting to see, and really, really encouraging as well. So I think in terms of running costs, in terms of home charging, if you're on the right energy tariff, then yeah, it is absolutely super, super cheap to run an electric car. We've gone one step further actually on that total cost of ownership piece, and through Electrix we've got I'll put the link in the chat for everybody to have a look at, but we've got a really nice kind of tool that you can use on the Electrix website. We've got 9 electric cars there at the moment. We will increase that number, but you can go in, you can look at all the costs involved in terms of running those cars, from, you know, lease purchase to driving them, and you can compare them with their petrol, essentially their petrol equivalents. You can also compare electric car with electric car as well. So that might be interesting for people to have a look at.
Very cool, especially because there are some EVs that are rather big bloated SUVs with horrific inefficiency, whereas there's some that will be able to do, you know, basically double the electrical economy. If you look at an Audi e-tron versus a Tesla Model 3, you'll probably get twice the range out of the same amount of electricity, which saves hundreds of pounds a year easily. So yeah, that's a really good shout, having the EV versus EV as well.
I'll say, because again, that's no different to ICE vehicles. You've got a heavy right foot in some of those less efficient vehicles, and you're still going to burn through the fuel compared to those more efficient ones. So it's not new.
Yeah, exactly. And we do need to be putting more emphasis on efficiency of EVs. There's obviously there's the latest nonsense about EVs causing multi-story car parks to crumble under the weight of them.
But I can fact buff that, because actually the SUVs weigh more. So exactly. All the brand new SUVs that are diesel are actually way more, and it's actually the poor quality of the concrete. If you remember all the fuss that we used to have about the quality of the concrete from the 1960s when everything was being built, it's actually around that. So that's just myth busting.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, you know, those with the means to do so, with the loud kind of mouthpiece of a tabloid newspaper that loves to just be a bit of an edgelord about these things, will publish these articles, and you know, some people treat it as gospel. But meanwhile, people who've actually bothered to go on Wikipedia and look up the curb weights will quickly go, oh, well, that's nonsense. EVs are generally lighter. But anyway, yeah, really good point, Lorna. So Gill, coming back to the well, actually, sorry to say, thank you for your summary, I should say, of sort of top tips for reducing the cost of home charging as well, like off-peak tariffs, like dynamic tariffs, the half-hourly kind of tracking the wholesale price, sometimes pays you to charge your car in little half-hour slots if there's lots of wind power and not much people using it overnight. But there are a couple of other options, like, for example, home renewables. In fact, I'm charging my car off my solar panels just now and running this webinar. But one of the main reasons that we have Sara Merrick with us today is that if you can't have solar panels, or funnily enough, you can't host a 2 megawatt wind turbine in your back garden, there is another way to be able to, you know, take ownership of that and take direct savings from it. So Sara, tell us more about Ripple Energy and what you do.
Yeah, so what Ripple does is we enable everyone, no matter where you live in the country, to be able to own a small part of a large-scale wind farm or solar park. So we've got a solar park open at the moment, or it will be in a few days. So if you've got a reservation, you can buy shares now. So ownership is via a cooperative, and then just like having whatever 3 kilowatts of solar on your roof, you can have 3 kilowatts of the solar park, and you get the electricity that your share of the solar park generates. It's supplied to you via the grid. You need to be with one of our supply partners, but it works with, so our supply partners are Eon Next and Your Co-op Energy. So it also works with all of the Octopus brands and all the Octopus tariffs, and Unify for businesses as well. So it's just a really easy way to own your own source of clean power. And then our first wind farm is Craig Vather in Wales. That's been operating for a year. So over that time, they're saving per kilowatt hour. People were getting 9.5 pence a kilowatt hour saving off their bill for every kilowatt hour that their bit of the wind farm generated on a monthly basis. Because prices are so high, this year they're saving 27p a kilowatt hour, which is just amazing. But I mean, that's only because prices are so high. We expect, you know, as it's been discussed, prices are coming down, and so we would expect next year's saving rate to be lower because prices have come down. But it just shows that by owning your own source of stable priced, low cost electricity, you can protect yourself from price spikes. So we've got loads of our members, I think half our members have got EVs, because they find it, you know, if you combine it with Octopus Intelligent or people that used to be on Octopus Go, you know, you can be getting your electricity bills down to really, really low levels. So people have been saving just so much money off their electricity bill. And it just, you know, you don't know if you've got a ICE car, you don't know what the cost of petrol or the cost of diesel is going to be in 1, 5 or 10 years time. But actually, if you switch to an EV and you buy a bit of a solar park or a wind farm to power it with Ripple, you've stabilized the cost of powering your car for 25, 30, 40 years. So yeah, it's a really great way of controlling the cost of powering your home and also powering your EV. So but yeah, we got a solar, our first solar park is open for reservations at the moment, and then it'll be open to the public on Wednesday. So yeah, it's 40 megawatts, and the principle is it's cheaper to build a 40 megawatt or 42 megawatt solar park that can power 14,000 homes. It's so much cheaper than building 14,000 individual home solar systems. So you can get access to a bit of the big one as opposed to having a hold of your own scheme, albeit it works really well with home solar as well.
Isn't that amazing? Plus, if you are moving house, then you can just take that with you virtually. There's so many advantages to this. And
exactly.
as you said about, obviously with the prices being high at the moment, people are absolutely raking it in. But even in normal times, onshore wind and solar are so cheap versus most other forms of generation that you're going to be saving pretty much at all times. You know, it's not like you're going to lose out. Obviously, you know, your money's at risk, terms and conditions apply. But you know, the odds of any loss of income of investment are infinitesimally small, because this is such a no-brainer, and that's why I love Ripple. Out of curiosity, out of all the panelists here, has anyone got shares in a Ripple project? Really? Oh, you need to get one.
I'm seriously looking at this after this webinar.
I know.
I'll give you my referral code.
There are lots of people who are kicking themselves for not getting involved with Greg Mather, because it has protected people really, really well over the current price spike, because there was, you know, apart from having home solar, there was no other way that you could really protect yourself from the price rises that we've seen.
And can I just say to all of the people who invested in Craig Father, thank you so much for genuinely not being smug about it. We know you did. We know you made the right call, and you've been very humble about it throughout. So thank you. But yeah, honestly, that's just so exciting, and literally anyone in the UK can buy into this. Any plans for the Republic of Ireland, out of curiosity, Sarah?
It's only in Great Britain. It's not in Northern Ireland. But yeah, we are planning or hoping to be able to launch in other European countries in the coming years. Awesome.
I'll tell you now, Northern Ireland in particular, I think would be particularly keen for that, because Republic of Ireland, yes, it's probably not as innovative a grid as we have in mainland Britain, but Northern Ireland, I mean, the cost of connecting a rapid charger is frightening, as we discussed in the previous webinar, let alone, you know, the cost of a domestic power supply. If it needs a new substation, just because you are the straw that broke the camel's back for the existing grid, you're paying for the full shebang. It is horrifically obsolete legislation they've got there right now. So Ripple could make a profoundly positive change. So I'm aware that we're obviously doing our tradition of overrunning a wee bit. Firstly, does anyone need to jump off at 11 o'clock, or can we keep going? Right, Lorna, very quickly then, fleets, electric fleets, how can we save money? Are you saving money? How much are you saving?
So yeah, I'm not going to talk about cars, because cars are still an absolute no-brainer. So you just go with cars. And I know one of the questions in the Q&A was about, should we slow down for the infrastructure catch-up? Absolutely not. It's supply and demand, and a chicken and egg, and the more vehicles you have, the more infrastructure you need, and you will just keep building it. So that's just a very quick question on that one. When it comes to vans and commercials, of course, that's where I've still got quite a bit of a passion about, is how we get all those more difficult to do vehicles over the line. And it is a challenge. I'm not going to hide away from the fact that it's hard. It's hard because they are the toolboxes, they are critical, they are needed. When you're in cars, you have more of a choice. When you're in a van, you've got height restrictions on car parks. You've got all sorts of weird and wonderful things that prevent you doing what cars have easy access to, and it becomes a problem. it's still costing. So as difficult as a van is at the moment, and as well, and as challenging as you go all the way up to HGVs, things still cost in. And I say that because you can't get away from some of that maintenance side of it. Even with the supply chain issues we've got at the moment, it's still better to go down that route. Even with all the early dynamics out there of you get through your tyres quicker, well, actually, only if you're a go-kart driver. Otherwise, your tyres do last longer. So there's all sorts of challenges out there, but vans, yes, it's still needed. And you cannot, and I'm going to emphasize it as my last point before I go, we cannot forget the cost of the air quality. And so I am never going to go back to ICE vehicles on our fleet, regardless.
Awesome.
I'm not saying I'm going to pay any cost out there, but we're never going to change back. I might not change some of them just yet, but that's because I can't get the appropriate vehicle to do the job. Doesn't say it won't come, and I'll just change when I need to. I'm not going to throw away good stuff just for the sake of it, because that's also not a sustainable way forward.
True. And I'll tell you what, the vehicles that you're struggling to get an electric replacement for at the moment, one word: retrofitting. You can genuinely end up with an electric alternative.
I've looked at retrofitting, but unfortunately those ones, I need more airbags and other safety features. I can't do it that way either. So damn. So commercials are a different beast. And when you've got unions and legislation and rules and all sorts of bits, some of those wonderful entrepreneurs coming out and innovators, I just can't take them yet.
But, well, I mean, hopefully those will be coming in the next few years. It won't be too long. You'll have to wait. And before you run, Lorna, again, thank you so much for all your input. It's been amazing. But Sara mentioned something, Sara Merrick mentioned something very important with regards to Ripple Energy, which is, well, you alluded to businesses being able to sign up to this as well. Presumably that's businesses of any size, which in that case, any business.
Unless you're regulated.
Oh, right. Okay. Fair point. Shoot. Okay.
So we've had, I think the smallest business bought about £2,000 of the last wind farm, and the biggest one bought nearly £10 million. So there's a huge range, and it's all proportional. Doesn't matter whether you buy £25 of the wind farm or 10 million, you still get your same proportion of the electricity. So yeah, businesses can sign up and now buy a bit of a solar park as well.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Lorna, I better let you run. Keep being awesome. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I can't answer any more questions, but thank you for inviting me on this. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers,
Bye.
Lorna.
Hi, Lorna.
We are coming towards the end. We've kind of covered most of it. So we've discussed how, you know, charging for business, you can also do these kind of off-peak and dynamic tariffs, and there could well be opportunities with the likes of Ripple Energy as well. I mean, Ripple basically kind of stands alone in terms of the open accessibility to members of the public, and it's just such a kind of easy, approachable interface to deal with. But there is another key point coming back to the many surveys that have been conducted by Electrix at LV, which is public reaction to electricity price rises, because of course there was a lot of, again, tabloid sensation about, oh, the electric vehicle revolution has stalled, oh, petrol's going to come back and EVs will be redundant, they just don't work, which incidentally completely gets blown out of the water by the 5 Teslas that passed them as they were saying that. But, you know, Gill, tell us more about survey findings about public perceptions, which are just as important as bringing those prices back down again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, so when electricity prices were really, you know, they were on the way up. And of course, you know, lots of media coverage in terms of, you know, wow, charging your electric car is going to be so expensive now. So I was really curious to understand what current electric car drivers think. So I posed the question on Twitter and LinkedIn. So in spite of rising energy costs, if you had the choice again, would you still opt to go electric, to get an electric car? And almost 4,500 electric car drivers responded. And whilst 8% of the respondents were undecided, 83% said yes, they would still choose to go electric, which I think is, you know, which was really encouraging. And as has been sort of mentioned earlier on in the webinar, then, you know, yes, of course, cost is paramount in people's minds, but there are also other influences as well. And I just want to read out one quote somebody that commented on the poll. This one person said, "I have just rechosen an EV because it's better, quieter, easier to drive, and as I watch a year of climate chaos needed." And for me, that really sums it up really, really well.
I'd say so too. I think that's a fantastic note to bring us into the Q&A on this one. It's been, a really eye-opening session, and hopefully it's put to bed some of the myths about rapid charging networks and your home electricity suppliers deliberately ripping you off. It's far from the case. And anyone who's got an EV just now, or anyone who's about to buy one, weather that storm. Those prices are coming down again. You will have the last laugh. So we have a couple of questions that beat everyone else to the punch that were kind of emailed in advance. First up, what's the likely timescale for market reform via the REMA process? The government is currently talking about rebalancing prices with respect to levies on electricity and gas, but something more radical is needed. What are the panel's thoughts on splitting the market into fossil and renewable for electricity?
Do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. Make them pay. I would love to see the market split between fossil fuels and renewable energy. I think we'd see huge uptake in renewable energy and finally see the big oil and gas giants just take ownership for the huge amounts of profits that they're undertaking and the damage that they're doing to the planet. It's ridiculous. Why are they able to profiteer over such dirty practices? And why is it that lovely businesses like Sara with Ripple, like all the renewable energy tech giants who really genuinely do not come from an oil and gas background, have to fight so hard to get the investment that their businesses so deserve, when you've got these huge giants that have been around for decades, creating a ridiculous amount of revenue over essentially what has been a monopoly up until this point. It's ridiculous.
I think if the markets were split, there would be a risk that basically what you would have is the fossil market would have a really high price and the renewables market would have a really low price. So and that wouldn't help necessarily investment in new renewables. So you would just split the markets. One would have a really high price, and that is unlikely to be the renewables dominated market, and the fossil and the renewables one would be a lot lower. So there's a lot of potential implications that of splitting the market. And is that even politically, is it okay to be paying like fossil fuels loads more money than it would be you'd be paying for renewable power? So it's there's a kind of innate unfairness if it's like, right, it's a kilowatt hour of electricity, but if it comes from gas, you can get 2 or 3 times more than if it's coming from a wind farm. That doesn't seem very fair to me. I think in terms of splitting out the taxes, it's an absolute no-brainer to put the taxes on gas as opposed to on people's electricity bills. We want to be encouraging people to shift away from gas and towards electricity. At the moment, the tax system does the opposite for domestic customers. So that can be done. And I think I wasn't able to join the last government seminar on it, but I think that's happening, or at least it's kind of likely to be happening, and that can happen relatively quickly. Whereas actually splitting the markets will take, if that happens, and we don't know. There are so many different, the matrix map of all the different things that could happen as part of the electricity market reform is massive. All they can do is cross out the ones that they definitely don't want to do, but there's a lot still on there. It's years that it will take to, it's not an easy thing for them to do. And the government doesn't really even know what it wants or what's possible. So it will be, I expect it will be a long time before anything concrete happens.
On that note, I see Jim Blair has mentioned that Graham Cooper, formerly of National Grid, has suggested that potentially it could be a few years away, like 4 years for REMA to be implemented. That's definitely quite concerning. On the plus side, as we've discussed, wholesale electricity prices are coming down, and such is the way that commercial and domestic tariffs are set as a kind of average of several months worth of prices, we will start to see that trend downwards anyway. But nonetheless, should that happen again, it would be good to have that reform in place. Is there a way, do you think, that REMA could look into the encouragement of renewables by weighting those two separate markets, such that if renewables were, you know, to kind of price themselves very low, they'd be rewarded with an extra kind of, you know, cash reward, if you wish, you know, on top of their agreed tariff, while gas would be penalised for going too high via basically being able to track how much was.
Anything with a market, you want to make it as simple as possible, and the more kind of I think that would be seen as being very difficult. So it's really not clear yet what the outcome will be, and I think politically it will be really difficult to be paying a high price for a kilowatt hour of electricity from a gas station and a much lower price for a kilowatt hour of electricity from a wind farm. It's like the market does not, a consumer wants a kilowatt hour of electricity, probably would prefer it to come from wind rather than gas. So why should the gas get paid significantly more than the wind? So it will take a long time, as Graham said. It's not going to be quick, and like I said, the number, honestly, this matrix of options is, you could barely read the writing. It was so small because there were so many. I
mean, to kind of clarify on the splitting of the markets, the way that I would envisage it wouldn't be that some customers would pay the cheap renewable rate and some would pay the expensive gas rate. It's that you would then end up with a new overall wholesale price that depends on how much of that total electricity is coming from gas and the rest of it from, you know, renewables, for example. So say 60% of the grid was renewables and 40% was the fossil fuel / gas category. Then it would be 40% multiplied by that high price plus 60% multiplied by that low price. And that would be the wholesale price that people would work with. But I mean, that said, we'll see what REMA comes up with. And thank you for explaining just how horrifically complex it is to try and reform a market, let alone design a more simple one in the first place that we have today. Another question that came in, does anyone on the panel expect, there we go. Does anyone on the panel expect wholesale electricity prices to be decoupled from gas price in the near future? That answers that question. It's going to be a while, if at all. So I've not had a chance actually to have a look at all of the Q&A. Let's have a look and see what everyone's up to.
There's tons of it. We're going to need to do some rapid fire, I think.
Okay, so
rapid pun.
Hey. So Peter Gourd says, I use Intelligent Octopus to charge my EV overnight, which allows me a very low tariff per kilowatt hour. I've noticed that when the IO schedules the charging, it's in the 30-minute segments, which sometimes are adjacent to each other, but often with gaps in between when charging is paused for a period of time. So obviously the price of electricity goes up, but then goes down again. So it's basically waiting to charge when it's cheapest. My question is, how does this stop-start charging time or regime, affect the long-term care of my battery compared with single long charging session proceeding continuously from the beginning to the end of the session? From a technical perspective, for me, I would say that the battery itself's not going to care about that too much. It'll be quite happy with that. It's more a case of the contactors, which are being switched on and off for charging. So provided that the contactors in that car are well built and designed for hundreds of thousands of cycles, or well, actually probably not even that many, tens of thousands of cycles, then you'll be okay. But in theory, you're switching it on and off more often. The battery itself doesn't matter. It will be a little contactor relay that would be the thing that would make a fuss about that. So yeah, let's see if there's something that's kind of more, well, less sort of technical and more kind of policy and electricity pricing. Should we be slowing down the encouragement for uptake of EVs whilst we wait for necessary infrastructure? No, we've already covered that, as Lorna said. Absolutely not. It would be mad to do that, because that would basically reduce the market demand, which is already there. So vehicle to grid is in its infancy currently, but the future will be V2X. How long before you think this will become mainstream and help with the cost of energy? Has anyone got any kind of feedback on V2X trials, etc., at the moment? That'll be me then. I'm literally only just having a chance to read, so I'm trying to get some that you can answer. So Innovate UK, which is one of the main government research bodies in the UK, has currently got a V2X project grant round available just now for trialing various innovative vehicle to grid or vehicle to home or vehicle to load solutions. They've already had the first round of them. This is the second round. It's going to be bigger and better, etc. So it's coming. CHAdeMO, it's already mature. CCS is being developed, and then AC, so it would be a bi-directional onboard charger. I'm aware of some clever developments coming there, so you wouldn't even need a fancy special charger on the side of your house that has a CHAdeMO or a CCS cable and costs considerably more than an AC charge point. You'd be looking at using a standard AC charge point that you might have had already, and it's the car that handles the bi-directional charging. We're starting to see...
Euan, I saw this one. I wanted to butt in on purpose because we can quickly get lost in very technical descriptions. I just think it's one of those things, which problem are we trying to solve with V2X and V2G? I tend to understand it as great for load balancing, great for taking the pressure off the local grid. I don't know if it's necessarily going to help us reduce the cost of energy, though, for all the reasons that we started the webinar with. You've still got to recharge that car somehow. Of course, if you can intelligently charge it, then all the better. But a bit like when we started trying to sell EVs to be cheaper, I fear that the V2G, V2X argument is really centered around how can I maximize the opportunity? But there are huge on costs like the charge you just described. So I don't know, I see it being applied to a fleet basis with people sort of thinking, well, if I get solar on the roof, battery storage on site, and then utilize vehicles that can handle V2X and V2G, then I can reduce the cost of my running of that fleet. I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I'd need an economic modeler to work that one out for us. It's risky.
I would argue that if V2X is used at peak times, so you've come home from work and you plug in, and the remaining capacity of that battery is used to feed the grid, that's reducing demand for gas-fired peaking plants, which therefore reduces the cost of electricity. And then also, if you're charging that car overnight, you're reducing curtailment of renewables, because quite often, if it's a windy night, you're paying wind farms to shut down because the grid can't cope with it, whereas you're actually making use of that electricity, which is cheaper than the cost of curtailing it and spending money on producing nothing. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that V2X would be a useful solution. Plus, for people who don't use their EVs very much, for example, I've got a Leaf that sits at the back of my driveway. It doesn't look like it's doing much, but it's a battery on wheels that powers my house, because I've got a V2X charger. So yeah, for people who don't do a huge amount of mileage and just take the car down the shops once a week, such households do exist. They can actually play a significant part in decarbonising the grid, not having a standalone battery, but basically having a two-in-one solution, a battery on wheels that's there when they need it. Abigail Bettany says, roughly what proportion of the UK's generation capacity is covered by contracts for difference? Who's got the answer to this?
I don't know. I think it's less than 10%. If you think like most of the offshore wind farms, well, all of them built since 2015, 17 probably, would have one. Few onshore wind farms, but not very many at all. So yeah, you'll look probably, off the top of my head, I would say between 5 and 8%. So not a huge amount. Obviously in the next 10 years, it will increase significantly as you get more offshore wind farms coming on, more onshore and solar that's covered by CFDs, and obviously the nuclear as well.
Do you know what? I don't know if anyone saw what happened there, but basically when I said, who wants to take this one, everyone just kind of looked at Sarah's box on the screen and went,
I literally went, not me.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really useful. I think this is, here's one. Ron Bagnall says, the National Grid When to Plug In app shows sources of electricity by region. How are various sources of electricity allocated to regions? Now, I presume that means in terms of the likelihood of having a gas-fired power plant near you versus a wind farm near you. Lorna would have been quite a handy one, but that said, Sarah, of course, this is very much your area of expertise too. But where are the cleanest bits and the dirtiest bits of the national grid?
The cleanest bits are in Scotland because there's so much wind up there, and the dirtiest bits tend to be actually where Greg Vather, our wind farmers in South Wales, that is quite consistently one of the dirty bits. And then in north, yeah, I mean generally kind of the further south you get, the more the higher carbon the electricity tends to get. But I think it's not a case of, you know, electricity isn't kind of allocated anywhere on the grid. It sort of, it flows and there's transmission constraints, but you know, I think people wouldn't be like, right, we're going to send that electricity down there. That's just not how the grid works. But yeah, so in general, you know, if you look at a map of, you know, how carbon intensity of the grid, generally Scotland will be nice and green, and South Wales will be you know, brown or red, and then kind of the Midlands is generally quite dark as well, because that's where you've got the gas-fired power stations. Obviously the coal, you know, the couple of coal stations that are still around there in northern England as well. So yeah, generally Northern England and South Wales are the least green. You know, if you split the grid up, those are the least green electricity bits.
I'm sorry, Sara, I couldn't quite hear you over the copious amounts of renewable energy we've got up here. It's a really sunny day today as well as windy, so we're just showing off now. But you know, in terms of South Wales, I think pretty much everyone in this conversation would personally blame Kevin Booker for that. He's a very bad...
I was going to say, I can remember seeing a message from you in a WhatsApp group where you sent a screenshot of the National Grid thing. You're like, damn it, Kevin, and you've called him out because it's like just Wales, just South Wales, and he's like,
just Kevin's house. It's 100% Kevin's house. He says he's like an EV advocate, but he's sitting there running like, coal-fired Bitcoin mines and stuff like that. I'm joking. But the thing is, like, yeah, it was basically that day. All of the National Grid was exceptionally clean, and it showed you the little, you know, the little circles with the numbers in. It was all like very low tens of grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and then it was South Wales was like 300 or something. It was like, oh, Kevin, come on. So yeah, very disappointing to break that chain. But West Midlands is an interesting one because it's a bit of a yo-yo dieter. So sometimes it is quite carbon intensive, but sometimes if it's a particularly windy day, it's almost as if there's overspill from Wales and kind of neighbouring regions that feed into the West Midlands, so it ramps down its fossil fuel generation and ends up being moderately clean. But yeah, it's very inconsistent and it needs to improve. Whereas North England has recently cheated because they've connected to the Norwegian grid that's almost 100% hydropowered. So they are routinely some of the lowest carbon in the UK at the moment. But yeah, no,
I always think it's a bit unfair to look at like the regional picture, because ultimately, you know, emissions are a global thing. So it's only the UK's emissions, whether or not emissions are created in South Wales or Scotland is kind of irrelevant from a climate change perspective. You know, Northern England and South Wales are sort of bad because that's where the fossil fuel stations are. That's where the gas and the coal stations are. They're, you know, the coal stations are where they are because that's where the coal mines are as well. So it's kind of, it seems a bit mean to be sort of like you know, having a go at a region for being, you know, having a sort of bad carbon intensity when, you know, it's just because there's a coal station there and that's been operated, it's about to close, and it's just built there because that's where the coal mines were, kind of thing. So yeah, ultimately, you know, you can see a regional picture, but it's not particularly helpful. What really matters is the UK overall. Are we as a country doing enough, rather than, you know, in individual regions, because so much of it is just historic, you know, circumstance as to why things are in one region rather than another.
Good point. Very quick kind of follow-on question from that is, has the English planning side of things taken aperitifs to cure it of its allergy to onshore wind yet? Or is that still yet to be lifted? Because
still very much really left to be lifted. So yeah, I think, you know, the overwhelming response from industry to there was a consultation on changing the planning, a few words in the planning, national planning policy framework. The overwhelming response from industry was, this is going to do nothing. So it was just come back with something better, because that's going to do absolutely nothing. So yeah, it's the government's proposals as they were set out in autumn last year were not going to change anything at all. So yeah, there's still a lot of work needs to be done to get more, to get any wind farms built in England.
That is desperately sad. It needs to be improved, because I mean, you just need to look across the border at Scotland, and we're entirely happy with the large amount of onshore wind we have. There is very little in the way of opposition. I remember in the last decade, well, there was one grumpy taxi driver, and that was it. So, you know, we're happy with it. There's loads round about where I am as well, but they're reasonably sited. It's not like, you know, you're putting them in migratory bird paths or in the middle of Glencoe or something like that. You know, we're sensible about where we put them.
That's it. Last year, our Greg Vather wind turbine was the only wind turbine to start generating in the whole of Wales, and in the whole of England, there were 2 turbines that together were smaller than Greg Vather. So it's just dire, you know, it's really bad, and it needs, you know, and I think the planning system, people actually really like, they're fine with wind farms, and it's kind of this hangover from, you know, 10-15 years ago when there was there was a perception that there was a lot more opposition. In reality, there wasn't. Poll after poll shows that people really love wind farms and they're fine with them, but yeah, it's just growing the amount of support there is for onshore wind. So yeah, it's crazy, the current situation.
Absolutely. So write some letters to your MPs if you're based in England, basically, to get that sorted, because it's taking the mick now. Scotland says catch up. So CFDs and other contracts are keeping the price down. Well, if they are keeping the price down, what price would a fossil fuel only system be? Oh, that's interesting. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt around prices being higher because of renewables. Oh, Sarah's typing an answer, actually. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the fossil fuel only market would be for electricity if it was literally all gas or...
So it would just be incredibly volatile. It would just completely depend on what the gas price is. So, you know, gas price goes up, the price is going to go up. The gas price comes down, the price will come down. You know, it's who knows? But the one thing you do know is how much it costs to operate a wind farm and a solar farm for their lifetime. So, you know, and that's any technology that has a fuel has massive fuel price risk, and you know, the gas price can shoot up overnight. So we don't know. You know, you know, the cost of electricity from a gas-fired power station is the cost of gas plus a bit of running costs. But you know, you might know what the running cost is, but you don't know what the gas price is. So yeah, it's very, very difficult to predict.
And a kind of follow-on comment from that or question is, if gas remains very expensive, can we have any hope of the cost of electricity falling until we totally stop using gas to generate electricity? Well, I mean, it is falling now, but how far can it fall is the question, really. How far is it realistically going to fall? Is it too... I suppose it's a tricky question because we don't have a crystal ball about gas supplies, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are various different, you know, government scenarios. Obviously, if you own your own source of clean power, then you are protected from the impacts of gas prices on the electricity price. So, yeah, it depends, basically. So, yeah.
So Ron Godfrey asks a good question here. How does a fair effect trickle down to the less well-off in society? The ones who cannot afford to add renewables to their home are a little way off of the EV transition. Perhaps they can't even afford a ripple solution. So how would that, you know, all of the kind of EV uptake, ripple uptake, solar PV uptake trickle down to those who are less well off? I've got an answer to this, but I want to sit back and see what the panel thinks on this.
Well, as I said, it's not always about I don't know. I just think it comes down to, in the EV market, making sure that the CPOs, the charge point operators we are using, have transparency about where their energy comes from, because by far my electric car at 30,000 miles a year on public network charging alone is probably my biggest electricity consumption. My ancient little terrace cottage is run majority on gas. I can't do much about that at the moment, not least of all because it's a conservation area, so I can't put renewables on anyway. The whole roof would just cave in. So I feel like I'm stuffed and I'm in that middle section. So it must be, you know, really tough. And I'm surprised that affordable homes, as they're called, aren't going to be mandated to have solar array, three-phase supply, so that can unlock that energy potential for them. I just think it's got a very long way to go. And actually, I was talking to a company called, I think it's Utilita, who were campaigning to not allow people with affordable homes to have their gas boiler taken away. They didn't want it to be an electric boiler for them, just because they were worried about the fluctuating prices of electricity, which is a really interesting take. I'll dig out that interview, but I had never thought about it from that perspective before. So yeah, lots of work to be done, and a really sort of early doors, like Lorna was saying earlier, approach to the market. Lots to learn.
Yeah, I mean, personally, what I would say is if more households, like just now, as I say, I'm charging my car and probably heating the hot water by this point too, but I'm currently drawing 0 watts. It's probably not going to show up, but there we go. Yeah, I thought that would happen. Anyway, it's currently drawing 0 watts from the grid. So my house is invisible today to the grid. And the more houses that do that, the more communal renewable electricity there is from the wind farms across the hill there for other households to be able to use, which displaces gas, which reduces the cost of electricity. So that is somewhat going to trickle things down. But basically, if those who have the means to be able to do so leverage that, and they get rewarded with cheap electricity. I'm paying nothing for my electricity right now, and I'm drawing several kilowatts. However, that means that the cost of electricity for people who don't have the means to be able to do, on site or off site in the case of Ripple, renewables and other tariff reduction techniques will end up with cheaper tariffs overall because there's less gas being burnt and we get to kick gas quicker. I'm aware that we are already well and truly out of time, so I'm going to rattle through the last kind of couple of questions.
I really have
here.
to go, actually. Sorry, I'm getting hassled by the people.
Sorry.
All right, anyway,
so much,
thank
Sara.
you for having me. Okay, all right.
Great insight, Sara. Bye.
Thank you. I'm aware that I've been kind of pushing the limits of our timing here. So someone said that they've had at least 20 LED bulbs fail on them within 200 to 300 hours of use over the past 5 years, yet they're told they last thousands of hours. Explain, please. 2 possible reasons for that. One, cheap hardware with overpowered, it's basically driven too hard for the spec of the bulb. So, if you buy quality, it should last longer, but there's a lot of cheap and nasty stuff. The original LED bulbs that were lower power did last absolutely yonks. But in the quest for brighter light, some people have been putting drivers in that are way too hard for the LEDs, and they are failing quicker than they should, and it is an annoyance of mine as well. The other thing is it could be that the wiring in your house is a bit dodgy and that's taking out the bulbs. So watch out if it's a particular light bulb socket that that keeps blowing each time, then there's a good indication that there's something that the bulb doesn't like very much. But there's one that the 3 of you would probably have a fun time answering from Gary Comerford. Does somebody want to explain why there is such a huge disparity in pricing between different charging networks? I understand a 10p difference per kilowatt hour for different charge point operators, CPOs, for example, but if one of them can charge, say, 50 pence per kilowatt hour and the others are charging 98 pence per kilowatt hour, what's the main driver for this difference? And that won't just apply to Type 2 AC, cheaper to install and run charging infrastructure versus rapid chargers. We're looking at Tesla and GridServe versus for the likes of Genie Point, who just announced today that they've put their prices up, I think.
Oh, I wasn't going to name them. That was who I paid 98p.
Did they do that again?
Oh, yep, just this morning.
That was just last week, wasn't it? That they did that as well.
Yeah,
really?
Well, that's the point. It goes up and down. It's a great question, Gary. I think in the interest of time, I'd say it's investment models. So a lot of these larger CPOs who are charging less per kilowatt hour, 52, 55 to 60p, are probably massively bankrolled into the future for the next 10 to 15 years. Some of the others have been more organically grown with the same amount of pressure and workload, but have had to put the prices up to cover their costs. So, like, for example, incumbents for local authorities who have had to use central government funded money will be seeing a slightly higher price at this point because their return on investment models are they're very varied.
Fair point. And the final question, I'm aware, as I say, we're definitely over. So Shane Rees, who will be a panelist on the next Faster webinar, what does the panel think of monthly membership fees? For instance, Tesla offers a cheaper pence per kilowatt hour if you pay monthly to be a member, as a non-Tesla driver, that is. Same with Fastnet. So what do we think of these subscription models?
I absolutely despise a subscription model. I think that you can just read the chat today to see that nobody wants to be wedded to one network, and paying a subscription is like your Netflix, your TV. We consume in the same way. So it doesn't matter what you're consuming. You probably don't like the idea of having some kind of rolling monthly fee. Why not just make it that you benefit in other ways? Like, we're talking a lot about gamification, about app access. And if you use it at a certain time, you could benefit from a cheaper electricity tariff if they're willing to share with you their price. But sod that, everyone just wants coffee in the chat, free coffee, 10% off coffee, coffee. So it's about making the human feel good, even though they're paying more for it. So let's just flip it. Let's just do it that way round, surely. It's just a greedy way to guarantee a certain level of income, but it makes people feel very choked. And then the expectation on the CPO to provide high level of service goes up as well. You're like, I'm paying for this every month and I still can't get the service I want. It's just risky. I don't get it.
On the other side of that, though, what I will say is, sorry,
yeah, go for it.
is from the business perspective, being able to demonstrate ongoing recurring revenue when seeking things like investment, having a subscription model is really key to showing how you can gain future income. So that's probably why businesses may look to establish a subscription model, is because then they can guarantee and also gain that loyalty without exploring things like gamification and all these wonderful things that you want to add into like free coffees at charge stations. If they say, right, we've got 100 people that we know will come to this particular station, and they will do that because they subscribe to a fee of like £2 a month. So that's what £24 a year times 100. We know we're going to get this revenue of income. And I think that's probably where the question has come from, in terms of, is this something that we see as a viable product in future? But it's really interesting to hear it from your side of things, where you're like, actually, I hate it. I do not like to see subscription.
Yeah, I spoke personally there. That's me as a driver, obviously massive EV advocate, always have been, but also pro consumer choice. And that investment model doesn't massively, it's not watertight, because there's nothing to stop people cancelling subscriptions or just, never being a member ever again, because the consumer experience was so bad that they decided not to be part of that team anymore. But yeah, I see the value in all these things. I think it's down to consumer choice, though, and it seems to be like, we work with a lot of fleet drivers, and they have to obviously stop their day, so they want to maximize their time, and making sure you take them to a charger where they can benefit in other ways, like the food or drink that they like, is far more likely to drive revenue. We saw this in the cycling world. This came from a Dutch embassy study about how consumers behave around something they have to do anyway, and how to increase their spending whilst they're there. So you can flip the revenue model a different way and do a share, like a kind of a two-way street, a little side hustle.
And there's the danger of falling into a subscription model with a particular CPO who do not prioritize maintenance or even having a function.
What are you talking about?
No idea. But if you do end up going on to something like a subscription model for a vehicle, as I am, and there are a couple of companies out there, but they all have different CPOs that they're offering up.
That's right. Yeah.
That you can publicly charge with.
If you package.
But if you fall into a contract with the wrong CPO, you're never going to get your vehicle charged when you're out on the road, and you're going to spend excess amounts of money going to other CPOs whilst you're trying to learn who's reliable and who's not. So very interesting.
You feel like you've overpaid then, because you've paid for X amount. I think, there's some great roaming partners out there. You've got to hand it to Power, Neil Riddell. He's done a fantastic job of unlocking that consumer choice and not making it too unaffordable as well. We learned that from the EV rally, which was marvelous.
Plus, it's very accessible as well. And on the point of accessibility, because it's an RFID card, so it's easy to use the Power system. Kate, obviously your business is ChargeSafe, so you're all about the accessibility and safety of charging infrastructure. Are there any accessibility concerns about some subscription models making it too faffy to use, even for people who are completely able-bodied? But just like, for example, if it's an app-based thing that you have to use to get subscription rates, and if that app is a bit clunky, has this been looked into by ChargeSafe at all?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we do explore is the remote digital application, being that, it's got to be well sized with the font, it's got to be beautifully laid out, easy to read and understand, and even the icons that are being used, especially, I think maybe not so much in the UK, but definitely as you get over to America, if we spread ChargeSafe over there, there's a large portion of the population who actually can't read. So having really simple icons to understand how to plug in your vehicle can be really important. So yes, your application matters. If you are reliant on initiating a charge via an application, it is going to become super important for accessibility, not just for those who are disabled, but also people who just want to be able to plug in and charge and move along on their merry journey. It shouldn't be a huge task. It shouldn't be a massive challenge. It should just be, okay, how do I get this thing to work? And what does that handshake piece look like? Is it plug in and then pay? Is it pay then plug in? And why can we not all just create a universal model of this is how we charge our car? Can we create a nursery rhyme around that? I think that would be
this is how we charge our car.
This is how we charge our car. We plug in and then we pay.
I'm really pleased with what you've done, Kate. You've opened up a huge door for people to understand how difficult it can be, how intimidating it can be, not just, you know, everybody, because everyone I'm talking about, but for the consumer experience piece, the government is obviously mandating contactless on all chargers, including retrofit of 7.4, well, 7.1 and above. As well as 50 kilowatt, which is a lot. Like that's a huge task. I'm working behind the scenes with CPOs on this because people are fretting. It's a huge investment, huge lack of infrastructure is in the hardware that needs to be fitted, huge lack of understanding about how complex that's going to be. So my proposal, my call, my plea is that no matter what charger it is, when you get there, you can have multiple methods of paying. The critical thing about that policy is that it has to be a pre-proprietary measure. So something like an RFID card that you've already got on your person, but that will only be achieved through massive roaming interoperability, open data protocols, cost center sharing. You know, that's still a long way off as well. So it's a bit of a race, hardware, software, who's going to rule? But ultimately, yes, huge swathes of subscription only access closed networks need to just take a day off and make space.
Well, thank you everyone for all of your insight. As I say, we've gone well over, we've been incredibly broad reaching with all of the discussion today, and it's been hugely insightful. I hope the panelists have had as much fun as the audience clearly have with the chat there. And also, yeah, I've found it all fascinating too. Sara, you're going to be jumping across to your own webinar now, of course, at the EV Cafe, aren't you? So please do share the link in the chat if you haven't done so already, so that we can all sign up to that. And what's on EV Cafe today then?
We're doing a rundown of all the big events, the ones to watch, which is ironic because I've got massive FOMO for not being at the CV show right now. Yeah. But yeah, we've got some people tuning in live from there. So Paul Kirby will be live, Sam Clark will be live from the CV show, and John and I will, well, I'll be sat right here. In fact, it'll be like you never saw the transition. But yeah, please come on over. It's lovely to see you and hear your thoughts.
Superb. And as for the Faster project, we'll be back at 10 a.m. on the 17th of May, and we're going to be asking, do you need a driveway or a depot to run electric vehicles? So at least 2/3 of the remaining panelists here will no doubt find that of particular interest. There are certain people who've been chatting away who are panelists at this next webinar. As I mentioned, Ryan Robertson and Shane Rees amongst them as well. It's going to be fascinating because there's all sorts of innovative solutions that are out there. And it's just a case of getting permission from landlords, including local authorities, to use those just as well. Ryan loves playing with all the latest tech he can get his hands on. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sara, Gill, Kate, and of course,
awesome,
Sarah, Merrick,
thank you.
and Lorna McAtear as well. We will see you again on the 17th of May. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much.